I spent my life caring for my sick brother, believing we shared a rare, debilitating blood disorder. After he betrays me for our inheritance, I discover my tests were faked. I'm perfectly healthy and he's been draining my vitality and my bank account for years. The needle slid under my skin with a practiced rhythmic ease that should have terrified me, but after 30 years, it was just the cost of survival. I sat at the small kitchen table watching the dark crimson fluid fill the vial while my brother Marcus watched me with eyes that seemed to weigh the very value of my life. We were two halves of a broken whole, tethered together by a rare blood disorder that had stolen my youth and anchored me to this house. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of pale exhaustion that I had spent my entire life trying to heal, never suspecting the sickness was a lie. Our shared burden was the only world I knew, a bond of blood and illness that I believed was unbreakable until the moment he decided my ruin was worth more than our family. Living in Willow Creek meant living in slow motion. Our quiet life was dictated by a strict medical schedule that replaced the spontaneity of youth with the cold precision of a pharmacy. Every morning began with the vitals ritual. I would shuffle into the kitchen, my joints feeling like they were filled with wet sand, to find Marcus already setting out the monitors. We checked our blood pressure, our oxygen saturation, and our glucose levels as if we were preparing for a mission rather than a simple breakfast. This constant fatigue was a thick fog that kept me from ever pursuing a real career. I had a degree in accounting that sat gathering dust in a frame because I couldn't commit to a 40-hour workweek without my body collapsing. Instead, I did freelance bookkeeping from my bed, earning just enough to feel like I wasn't a total ghost in my own life. This sense of being broken wasn't something that happened to us. It was who we were. My earliest memories aren't of birthday parties or bike rides, but of the sterile white walls of specialist offices. I remember being 6 years old, clutching a tattered teddy bear, while our mother explained to a doctor that Marcus and I were special. She told us we were like delicate glass ornaments, beautiful to look at but easily shattered by the world outside. Marcus, being 2 years older, took this to heart more than I did. He became my protector but also my shadow. If I tried to run too fast in the backyard, he would shout for me to stop, his face contorting in a fear that I thought was love. "You'll trigger a flare, Elena," he'd warn, pulling me back into the shade. We were raised in a cocoon of fear, a bond forged in the fires of a shared, invisible enemy. When our parents passed away in that sudden, horrific accident, the cocoon didn't break. It just got tighter. They left behind a substantial estate. A house, several investments, and a trust fund specifically designated for our ongoing medical needs. Standing at their gravesite, I felt a strange, conflicting wave of emotions. I was devastated by the loss, but a small, hidden part of me looked at Marcus and felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time, we had the financial means to seek out the best treatments in the country. We wouldn't have to settle for the local clinic anymore. I imagined a life where we weren't just managing the decline but actually getting better. I thought this inheritance was our ticket to freedom, a way to finally pay back the years we'd lost to the shadows. However, as the legal dust began to settle, I noticed a subtle, chilling shift in my brother. The Marcus who used to share his blankets with me during cold nights was replaced by a man who spent his days staring at bank statements with a predatory intensity. He stopped asking me how I felt and started telling me how he felt. His demands grew by the day. He claimed his condition was accelerating, that the lead in his veins was becoming unbearable. He began talking about exclusive, experimental clinics in Europe that cost tens of thousands just for a consultation. When I suggested we look for a program that could help both of us, he grew cold. "I'm the one who's failing, Elena," he'd snap, his voice losing its brotherly warmth. "You're stable. I'm the priority right now. If I go down, you go down with me." The pressure became a daily weight. He would leave brochures for expensive medical retreats on the coffee table, highlighted with aggressive yellow strokes. He started questioning my small purchases, a new pair of shoes, a book, claiming that every dollar I wasted was a minute taken off his life. He made me feel guilty for being the healthier one even though I was still struggling to walk up the stairs. He began to isolate me further, telling our few remaining friends that I was too ill for visitors, while secretly preparing the paperwork that would change everything. He spoke of streamlining our assets and protecting the family legacy from the prying eyes of the government and tax collectors. The climax of this manipulation happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. The house felt damp and the smell of old paper filled the study. Marcus sat behind our father's desk looking more like a stranger than a brother. He pushed a thick stack of legal documents toward me. "It's a new trust structure," he said, his voice dropping to a low, soothing hum that reminded me of our mother's bedside manner. "It puts everything in one place. I'll manage the investments and the medical bills so you don't have to worry. You've been looking so pale lately, Elle. Your memory is slipping. Let me take this off your plate. Just sign here and we can get started on my new treatment plan next week." I looked at the pen, a heavy, gold-plated thing that had belonged to our father. My gut twisted with a sudden, sharp intuition, a warning bell I had been trained to ignore since childhood. I felt my own strength flickering, a strange dizzy spell washing over me that made the words on the page blur into meaningless black lines. I thought about the playground, the hospital visits, and the way Marcus had always held my hand when the needles came out. I told myself I was being paranoid, that he was just as scared as I was. I believed that by signing that paper, I was saving the only person who truly knew me. I leaned forward, the pen felt like a lead pipe in my hand, and I scrawled my name across the bottom of the contract. As soon as the ink dried, Marcus didn't hug me. He didn't thank me. He simply picked up the papers, tucked them into a leather folder, and walked out of the room without looking back. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone in that house. A healthy woman trapped in a dying world of my brother's making. The door clicked shut with a finality that echoed through the hollow hallway, leaving me shivering in the shadows of the study. I stared at the spot where Marcus had just stood, my signature still wet on the document that surrendered my life to his whims. Usually, after such a stressful ordeal, I would feel the familiar lead settling into my bones, dragging me toward my bed for a 12-hour coma. But that evening the air felt different. It felt charged, like the static before a lightning strike. I didn't go to sleep. Instead, I retreated to the sunroom, curled under a knitted throw, and watched the rain lash against the glass, my mind churning with a restlessness I couldn't explain. 2 days later, the first crack appeared in the foundation of my reality. Marcus had told me to stay in bed, claiming my pallor was worsening and that he had arranged for a private specialist to visit the house for his own deteriorating condition. I lay upstairs, the door cracked just a sliver, listening to the heavy tread of boots in the foyer. It wasn't the soft, rhythmic step of our family physician. This was someone else. I heard the low murmur of voices drifting up the stairwell. Usually, medical consultations in our house were clinical and precise, but as I crept toward the landing, the tone sounded all wrong. I pressed my ear against the cold wood of the banister. Marcus wasn't describing symptoms. He was arguing about delivery timelines and market fluctuations. A gruff, unfamiliar voice snapped back. "The paperwork is clean, but the transfer has to be immediate. If the audit hits before the shell company is active, we're both finished." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Shell companies? Audits? This wasn't the language of hematology. I waited, breathless, until the front door slammed and the gravel of the driveway crunched under departing tires. When Marcus walked back into the kitchen, I watched him from the shadows of the upstairs hallway. He didn't look like a dying man. He moved with a predatory grace, pouring himself a drink and whistling a tune I didn't recognize. The fragile brother was gone, replaced by a man who looked entirely too comfortable in his own skin. That night, the doubt began to rot the edges of my loyalty. I waited until I heard Marcus's rhythmic snoring, a sound he usually claimed was labored breathing, and slipped downstairs to the home office. I needed to see our shared medical logs. For years, we had kept a leather-bound binder of every blood test, every white cell count, and every specialist's note. It was our survival map. But when I pulled the heavy drawer open, my stomach dropped. The blue binder was gone. In its place was a thin manila folder containing only the last 3 months of summaries, vague typed pages that lacked the official hospital letterhead I remembered. I began to dig deeper, moving folders and checking the back of the filing cabinet. Nothing. It was as if our entire medical history before the inheritance payout had been scrubbed from existence. I found a single scrap of paper caught in the shredder's teeth, a corner of a lab report from 5 years ago. I recognized the date. It was the month I had felt my strongest, right before Marcus insisted I start a new iron supplement. The word normal was visible in the margin, circled in red, right before the paper was sliced into ribbons. Why would a normal test result be shredded? The next morning I did something I had never done in 30 years. I lied. When Marcus brought me my daily fortified tea, I forced a smile and told him I was feeling a bit better and wanted to drive into town to look for some new yarns for my knitting. He hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he scanned my face for any hint of rebellion. "Don't overexert yourself, Elena," he warned, his voice like velvet over sandpaper. "You know how the sun triggers your dizziness." I nodded meekly, waited for him to retire to his study, and then drove straight past the town center, heading for the city hospital 2 hours away. The city clinic was a world away from the private, hushed offices Marcus always insisted on. It was bright, bustling, and smelled of floor wax. I walked up to the reception desk, my hands shaking so violently I had to tuck them into my coat pockets. "I'd like a full blood panel," I told the nurse. "Everything. Toxicity, hormones, genetic markers. I'm paying out of pocket and I want the results sent to a private email address." I used a fake name, Sarah Miller, terrified that somehow Marcus's specialists would see the request. As the phlebotomist drew my blood, I didn't feel the usual fatigue. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. 3 days of agony followed. I played the part of the dutiful, dying sister, swallowing the bitter supplements Marcus provided, only to rush to the bathroom and force myself to get them out of my system the moment he turned his back. I noticed that without the pills, the lead in my limbs began to lift. The fog in my brain started to clear, revealing a landscape of memories that now felt like a long, orchestrated play. The phone rang while Marcus was in the garden, obsessing over the landscaping he wanted to fund with our money. I snatched the receiver. It was the clinic. "Is this Sarah Miller?" the doctor asked, her voice sounding puzzled. "I'm looking at your results. Miss Miller, there is absolutely nothing wrong with your blood. Your counts are perfect. In fact, you have the vitality of someone 10 years younger. However, we did find traces of a heavy sedative and a mild synthetic toxin in your system, something that mimics the symptoms of chronic anemia. If you've been taking any unverified supplements, I suggest you stop immediately and contact the authorities." I hung up the phone, the world tilting on its axis. I wasn't sick. I had never been sick. The years of missed parties, the abandoned career, the crushing fear of the flare. It was all a cage built by the person I loved most. My illness was a chemical prison, maintained by my own brother so he could keep me under his thumb. Fury, cold and crystalline, replaced the shock. I went back to the office while Marcus was still outside, using a letter opener to jemmy the lock on his private desk drawer, the one he always kept key-coded. Inside, I didn't find medical records. I found a leather portfolio embossed with the name of a private wealth management firm. I flipped through the pages, my breath hitching in my throat. There were transfer receipts dated the day after I signed the trust agreement. $500,000. $1 million. $2 million. All of it flowing from our parents' estate into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands under a name I didn't recognize at first. Sterling. Then I saw the passport tucked into the back of the folder. It was Marcus, but he wasn't wearing his glasses and he looked tan, healthy and vibrant. The name on the passport was Marcus Sterling. He wasn't planning on taking me to Switzerland or finding us a cure. He was planning on disappearing. He had spent his life draining my health to keep me compliant, and now he was draining the bank account to leave me with a hollow house and a fake diagnosis. I realized then that the weight of a shared burden was a lie. I had been carrying him my entire life, while he had been slowly siphoning the marrow from my bones. I looked out the window at him, standing in the garden, pointing at the roses and laughing with a contractor, and I knew that the fragile Elena was dead. In her place was someone he should have been very, very afraid of. I watched him through the window for a long time, my fingers tracing the cold edge of the stolen passport. A week ago, this discovery would have shattered me, but now it only hardened my resolve. I couldn't just scream. If I confronted him now, he would use that signed trust agreement to commit me or disappear before the banks opened. No, I had to be the sister he thought he had created. The frail, fading Elena who was too weak to question the hand that fed her poison. I carefully replaced the folder, relocked the drawer with the steady hands of a woman who was no longer trembling, and slipped back into the hallway just as the back door creaked open. For the next 7 days I gave the performance of a lifetime. I began crashing earlier in the evenings, leaning heavily on the walls as I walked past him. When he handed me my medicine in the morning, that bitter, murky tea, I would take a long, performative sip, catch his eye with a look of pathetic gratitude, and then wait for him to leave the room. The moment he was gone, I'd spit the liquid into a silk handkerchief I kept hidden in my sleeve. I spent my nap times not sleeping but recording. I used a small voice-activated recorder hidden behind the books in the study to capture his phone calls with M. Sterling's offshore brokers. I took photos of every forged lab report and every transfer receipt. I even saved a vial of the tainted tea, sealing it in a plastic baggie hidden beneath the floorboards of my closet. It was a week of quiet, simmering rage masked by a pale face and a soft voice. By Thursday, Marcus was buoyant. He was already talking about closing up the house for our supposed trip to the European clinic. He was careless now, leaving his laptop open while he went to shower. I used those precious minutes to forward his entire browser history and saved login credentials to a private cloud drive. I saw the airline tickets, one-way business class, to a destination that definitely wasn't a medical facility. He was leaving on Sunday. I decided our farewell would be Saturday night. Marcus, I said that evening, my voice a delicate rasp. Since we're leaving this house behind, I want to have one last proper dinner. Just us. And maybe Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer? He was so close to Dad, and I'd feel better knowing he's seen us off. Feels right for the family legacy. Marcus paused, a forkful of salad halfway to his mouth. He scanned my face looking for a trap, but I gave him nothing but a tired, watery smile. Henderson, he mused. He's a bit of an old bore. Al, don't you think you're too tired for company? It's just one night, I pleaded, touching his hand with my cold fingers. To celebrate your new beginning. Please. He chuckled, that condescending sound that used to make me feel protected but now made my skin crawl. All right, Elena. If it makes you happy. One last dinner for the history books. Saturday arrived with a heavy, humid stillness. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen preparing a roast, our father's favorite. I felt a surge of genuine energy, a physical strength that had been suppressed for years. I wore a high-collared navy dress that hid the lack of a lead in my step. When Mr. Henderson arrived at 7, looking distinguished in his gray suit, Marcus was in high spirits, playing the role of the devoted, burdened caregiver to perfection. It's a tragedy, Arthur, Marcus said, pouring the lawyer a glass of expensive scotch. Elena's counts are lower than ever. This trip is our last hope. I've liquidated a fair amount of the estate just to get her into this trial. It's what our parents would have wanted. Mr. Henderson looked at me with genuine pity. You've been a rock for her, Marcus. Truly. I waited until the main course was served, the silver platters gleaming under the chandelier. The tension in my chest was a coiled spring. As Marcus raised his glass for a toast, I stood up. I didn't lean on the table. I didn't wobble. I stood straight, my shoulders back, and the room went deathly silent. You're right, Marcus, I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong, devoid of the forced rasp. This dinner is for the history books. But we aren't celebrating your greed. We're celebrating my recovery. I reached into my bag on the sideboard and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table toward Mr. Henderson. Arthur, inside that envelope you'll find a blood panel from the City General Hospital dated 4 days ago. It shows I am in perfect health. You'll also find a toxicology report on the tea Marcus has been forcing me to drink for years. It contains a synthetic sedative designed to mimic chronic fatigue. The color drained from Marcus's face so fast he looked like the ghost he had always claimed I was. Elena, you're having a breakdown, he stammered, reaching for the papers. The illness, it affects the brain, Arthur, she doesn't know. I know everything, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his lies like a blade. I pulled out my phone and hit play on a recording. Marcus's own voice filled the dining room, clear and arrogant, discussing the offshore transfer of $3 million to Sterling, and his plan to leave me rotting in that house, while he started over. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Henderson's face shifted from confusion to a mask of professional icy fury as he scanned the documents. Marcus tried to stand, his chair screeching against the hardwood. It's my money too. I gave up my life for you. I stayed in this town for you. You stayed for the bank account, Marcus, I said, walking toward him. I felt no fear, only a profound sense of justice. You didn't give up your life, you stole mine. But the trust agreement you made me sign? It has a clause, one our father put in, about bad faith and criminal endangerment. Arthur, I believe medical poisoning and grand larceny qualify, don't they? Mr. Henderson looked up, his eyes hard. Beyond doubt. Marcus, I suggest you sit down. I've already contacted the local authorities. They are waiting at the end of the driveway. If you try to leave, it will only make the inevitable trial much harder for you. The sight of Marcus collapsing back into his chair, his face crumbling as the sick brother persona finally dissolved into that of a pathetic caught thief, was more healing than any medicine. I watched as the police led him away in handcuffs, his frantic excuses echoing down the hallway until the front door clicked shut one last time. The next morning the house was silent, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the past. It was empty. I spent the day packing only what belonged to the real me. My books, my journals, and the few photos of my parents from before the sickness took over. I didn't want the mahogany furniture or the sterile equipment. I walked out onto the porch, the morning sun hitting my face with a warmth I could finally feel in my soul. I wasn't a glass ornament. I wasn't fragile. I was a 30-year-old woman with a full bank account, a clean bill of health, and a world that was finally, for the first time, wide open. I turned my back on the house of shadows and walked toward my car. I had lost a brother, it was true, but as I turned the key and drove toward the city, I realized I had finally found the one person I had been missing all along. Myself.